Welcome to the REDHEADREVEAL Podcast. I am Jenn Pinkerton, your Redhead host, a psychotherapist, high-performance coach, writer, and speaker. As a connection expert, I help people reveal their connectedness within relationships, transforming from the root causes of beliefs and behaviors that hold them back from thriving in life. Let's talk about how you're thriving. Okay, so today I have Rachel Smith with me, a sex therapist and intimacy educator. Hi, how are you?
I am well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to open up this conversation.
Me too. I got to tell you, most of my audience really likes it on days we talk about sex. So this is, I really enjoy speaking with other people in this space who have a shared viewpoint, as I do, as far as really loving the concept of helping couples get the most out of their sex life or individuals get the most out of their sex life, and really recognizing how important that is for everybody to feel embodied and happy and fulfilled. And I think that the overall shift that we're going with that, with more people such as yourself that are really specializing in this, I think it's such an asset and plays an integral part to people really wanting to level up their lives in that way.
Yes. And what I see so often is that when we hear the word sex, we have a very limited view or understanding of what that means, right? And so that's why I tend to open up the conversation around intimacy overall. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where in our society, we also struggle, because when we hear the word intimacy, we automatically equate that with sex. When we hear the word sex, we automatically equate that with intercourse. And when we hear intercourse, we think that there has to be a specific ending in terms of a climax and orgasm, right? And so much of my work is helping my clients really take a step back and expand on those concepts, right? Because just because we might not have an orgasm, does that mean you didn't enjoy, that intimate time that you had together, that you didn't have pleasure or connection, right? And just because, you're not having intercourse, there's so many other ways that we can be sexual. And then when we think about intimacy is way more than sex. And so that's part of the reason why my business is Infinite Intimacy. And for some people, they might think that that's a misnomer, but it is very intentional because I very much believe that there are an infinite number of ways that we can be intimate, but we struggle because we have such a limited view of what that means.
And I concur completely. I think that most people are not taught to even taught or modeled or even exposed to view sex in that way. Just the concept of talking about, does an orgasm equal good sex is a strange thing. I think a lot of people get caught up in this performance driven way to view sex instead of recognizing an embodiment or recognizing a sensual connection, recognizing the bridge that intimacy can be towards an overall relationship.
Exactly. And that really is so much of my work. I believe that sensuality is an incredible bridge into sexuality. Mm-hmm. But again, in our society, we equate the two words. We think that sexuality and sensuality are one and the same, right? And although they can be very much connected, they also live on their own in a lot of different ways.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So what do you think is the most, maybe the most often sought answer? What are people coming to you with the questions of, we can call it presenting concerns, but I think for our audience, I like to just view it as, why did you go to get help from someone like you? So what do you think happens the most in your line of work with your clients?
What I see so often are discrepancies in desire. Mm-hmm. And so where one partner tends to want or need sex more often than the other, and not just frequency, but also the quality of the sex that they're having, right? And so I have some couples that are having sex, quote unquote, regularly, but it's become very much routine. And so then that passion or that drive isn't necessarily what it used to be previously in the relationship. I work with so many women as well that come to me and say, I don't understand why I've lost this part of myself. And if I didn't have sex a day in my life again, I would be okay. Right? And then I come back and I ask them, but are you enjoying the sex that you're having? Right?
Question.
And so there's so many nuances, right, to our sexual sexual self and our sexual response. But those discrepancies in desire, I think, are one of the major challenges that I see quite often. And a lot of times it's also because of a lack of education, right? When we don't even know the difference between desire and arousal, and we don't know that there are actually different desire styles, then that puts us in a place of feeling like there's something wrong with me, and there's something wrong with us. And why can't we, have these spontaneous, organic, intimate experiences that we had at the beginning of the relationship, when now it's 10, 20, 30, 40 years into the relationship, and the expectations maybe haven't shifted to match the ways that the family or the relationship has evolved as well.
And you touch on so many points in that. So I'm going to circle back to a few of them that really resonate with me is the idea of, is it ever going to be back to what it was originally?
Correct.
And I think that if that is the benchmark, if that's what every couple is saying, I want it to be just like it was when we had no business of marriage, we had no children, we were younger, we had not a care in the world, and we were full of lust. What will you say to that question?
Well, if we don't have any responsibilities, then of course we can be as free as we want.
Yeah.
And it's the responsibilities that comes with that kind of set of pressure, and it's the pressure that shuts us down. And so that's why so many couples tell us, that the best sex that they're having is when they're on vacation, right? When they're able to disconnect.
Hotel room sex.
Exactly, right? Because when we are in the role of a caregiver, especially, my work with women, right? When you're in the role of a caregiver, that doesn't speak to your sexual self at all, right? The role that we have to step into in terms of the responsibilities and all the ways that we have to, our to-do list and all the things that are vying for our attention, we are not even giving ourselves the space to connect with this part of ourselves and this part of our relationship. And it's not just going to emerge on its own for busy people, right? With careers and with families and with all types of things. If we are not being intentional about creating that space, we can't expect it to just happen spontaneously, maybe as it did in the beginning.
And I hear from that, prioritizing.
Yes.
And really, having this concept of I'm going to make this important in my relationship. And I see so often that part's missing, the priority aspect of it.
Yes. And saying I'm going to make this important, but then is there even an acknowledgement of why it's important to focus on this part, or to give this part of our relationship the space that it deserves, right? I follow, Esther Perel is like, one of my gurus, right? And one of the courses that I did with her, there's a quote that I use with my clients so often. She says, if all you do is focus on the family, then there won't be a relationship, right? If all we do is focus on the family and let the relationship go, then ultimately there won't be a family. Right. And when we recognize that the relationship is the foundation, right? And if we let that foundation go, then what happens to everything else that we've built? Right. And so that's why, this part of the relationship is so foundational and so important. But I think we're not able to connect with that because we're just so in the go of all of these other things that we need or think we need, in order for the family and our lives to kind of continue. But are we really recognizing the parts of the foundation that are so vital to keeping, like that glue to keeping all of this together?
For sure. And I think also there's this idea of responsibility. Whose responsibility is it to keep this going? And, at the end of the day, just like no one's responsible for our happiness, no one's responsible for our orgasm either. This is about us. It's about each individual person and how they're showing up relationally, emotionally, physically, sexually,
spiritually.
Exactly. And so I see that disconnect often as well, And I think that there's such a big difference in what's been modeled for people about sex, what they think, what's it supposed to look like, what's it supposed to be like. And sometimes that really misses the mark.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's those expectations, right? And, my colleagues and I call them sexpectations, that these sexpectations are really just wreaking havoc in our relationships because we have this very specific idea of how things should be. And, the cliche of, if you're focusing on the destination, then what happens to the journey, right? And that buildup and the way that we're still able to experience pleasure and connection in these intimate moments. But if we're so focused on this is what we're supposed to get to, or this is what it's supposed to look like, or this is how it's supposed to end, then we're missing all of that juicy, yummy, stuff that actually makes it meaningful.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to find out your perspective on vulnerability in intimacy, because I find that a lot of people have different viewpoints on that. And I'm curious to know what yours is on that, what you think about that.
Oh, well, I don't think that there can be true intimacy without vulnerability. And because vulnerability is that space of, and going back to work by Dr. Brene Brown, right? I mean, what she has found in terms of vulnerability is the birthplace of courage and connection. Right? It's allowing ourselves, when we break apart the word intimacy into me see, right? It's a process of allowing ourselves to be seen for who we are and all of who we are, right? The good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful, and everything in between, right? And it's also a process of seeing our partners for who they are, not for who I want them to be, right, or the potential that I see in them, right? Like, who are they now and who are they really? And is that something or someone that I also feel safe connecting to, right? And I also think that vulnerability is very much attached to authenticity, right? And this idea of, well, if I think I'm supposed to be showing up a certain way in this space, sexually, intimately, that I'm supposed to look a certain way or, perform a certain way, then am I allowing myself to be authentically me?
Of
right?
course not, because of the word supposed to.
Yes.
The word supposed to gets in the way.
Exactly. So I think they're all interconnected and without these vital pieces, right? But we can't be vulnerable if it's not a safe space to do so, right? So I think so often when couples come to me for sex therapy, sometimes they're surprised where, it kind of takes an air of traditional couples counseling, because as a licensed marriage and family therapist, that's really, the foundation of my training is relationships. And then with the added certification of sex therapy, we can really hone in on the overall experience of intimacy. But, when they're coming to me specifically for sex, and then I'm kind of going through the relationship history, and there's been, some experiences of betrayal and maybe some points where people aren't showing up in the way that they really need to in order to feel safe and secure, then no, we might not be able to access this other part of our relationship if we're not really establishing that safety and security first.
And that's a deeper dive, especially I think for people who really did not have that type of environment or modeling growing up, or maybe they feel uncomfortable with it. They're either afraid of it or get flooded by it, or might fear as though it presents them as being less strong. I mean, I think there's a lot of pieces and parts to that, but I think it's one of the things that most often doesn't get talked about as much, but I think it prevents people from showing up in the way that's going to create this beautiful sexual experience.
Exactly. Because again, I think we're viewing sex as like this separate thing, right? It's this thing that we're expected to do. Right. But we're not recognizing kind of all of the little strings that are very much attached to that. And if we're not paying attention to those things, if some of those strings are maybe, severed in some ways, then those are the places that we might need to pay a little bit more attention.
So what do you think you could sum up as like your best, few tips just to really increase the level of intimacy in a relationship?
Well, overall intimacy, I think, quality time is one of those things, right? Because when when couples come to me about, feeling disconnected sexually, and I ask them, well, when was the last time that you had a meaningful conversation? When was the last time that you actually were able to go out and enjoy each other's company?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because if we're not creating space for the relationship overall, then it's going to be that much harder to access that space sexually. Right. And so that quality time, and it can mean something different to everybody. Right. For some of my clients, they just want to be able to sit down on the couch and just, not have to say anything, just feel each other's presence. Right. For other people, it's, well, if we're not, being active and having these, different experiences, then no, I don't feel connected to you. Right. So that's something to explore with your partner of, well, what type of time do you like to enjoy with me? Right. Without any of those kind of conditions attached to it. So that quality time, I think, is major.
Do you think that date nights and that concept of date nights come into that? Because I see that often where there's this idea of, well, we're not having a date night is one partner, and the other partner is saying, but we're together all the time. And so there's this big disconnect in what that really means.
Yes, absolutely. And I saw that really inherently during the times where we were kind of locked down with COVID, right? Where couples were coming into the office and they're like, we're together all the time, right? And I'm like, okay, well, there's a difference between quality and quantity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just because you're in the same space or you're together all the time, is it meaningful connection? And what does meaningful connection mean to you? What would help to make that time more meaningful? Right.
I like that word.
Or give it, give it meaning, right? And creating that meaning. And I think inherently we think just because we're together, then, okay, we're together. But what does that time mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So quality time. Give us another one. What's another great tip?
Okay. So non-demanding touch. I think is a key factor here, because I have clients that they reject affectionate touch altogether because of the association or the expectation of where that touch needs to go. Right. And they've created certain patterns around, if he touches my leg, then that means I'm going to have to put myself in this other mode. Right. When, sometimes a touch is just a touch. Right. And allowing that to live on its own rather than having these expectations of where they need to go.
And I think you probably have some people listening to this applauding on that concept, because it's so common where you might have a partner that thinks, let me come over, just grab you. And that's going to mean that's what we're doing. And someone's like, oh, that gives me the ick. And so then there's this sense of rejection when in fact it could have all looked very different.
Yes, exactly. And I think there's misinterpretations around what the touch means. Right. Where for one partner, if they're coming up and just grabbing, it's, something has come over them of like, I just want to be close to my partner in this way. But then the other partner is interpreting that as, well, that means he wants sex. Right. But when I have, when we're able to kind of slow things down and we're able to really identify, what does this mean really? Right, outside of the stories that I've created in my head around what that means, right? Because once we're able to kind of distill, the expectations, then it kind of leaves room for these things to kind of live on their own. And it's the stories that we create, I think, that often gets in the way as well.
The story in our heads are so powerful.
Yes.
So powerful.
Yeah.
So, okay, give us one more good tip that you think that is something that people can really imagine. Okay, if I went home tonight and employed this, it might feel differently.
Yes, yes. Well, one of my favorite things when we talk about sexual communication, right? I like to take the sandwich approach.
Okay.
And so the traditional sandwich, when we kind of think about like HR and team building and things like that, it's kind of like a positive buffering a negative with a positive and then having that positive on the end there, right? Where I think opening up the conversation, I mean, communication, and even if we think about, Sex with Emily, Dr. Emily Morris, where she talks about, communication is lubrication,
Yes.
right? So are we having the conversations necessary that gives you insight into what our partners are actually wanting or needing, or what would be pleasurable for them, or what would be enticing or exciting for them to experience, or for me to experience, right? And so giving ourselves the opportunity to explore, you know what, I really love this thing, right? I really love this aspect of our relationship. So that's the first layer. The first layer is acknowledging something we really like, love, and enjoy, right? And this can be our sexual experience specifically, or it can be our relationship altogether, right? How can I open up to express to you, I really love when this thing happens, when you do this thing, or when we have this experience, right? And then it's entering in with something that isn't really working for us, right? And so this isn't framing it as, the critical, judgmental, like, why aren't you doing this? Or you never do this, right?
And it's the feeling of being attacked.
Exactly,
Right,
exactly.
right.
So it's bringing it back to, well, when this thing happens, it doesn't help me to feel safe. Or when this thing happens, or, this sexual position, or the way that we initiated sex this time just didn't really do it for me, right? So that buffering of something I really like, love, or enjoy, and then that little middle part of, this thing just doesn't work for me. And then the last part, I'm wondering if we can try something different, right? So that last layer is either offering a suggestion, if you are clear with what it is that you would prefer, or it's opening it up for collaboration. And so it's saying, well, I'm not sure, what else we can do. I had a couple of ideas, but do you have some ideas so that we can be intentional about creating a different experience next time?
And the biggest part I'm hearing with that is that people are talking. I'm a firm believer is if you can't talk about sex, why are you having it?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right.
And so this is communication that is, providing a platform to feel safe and comfortable, and hoping that your partner has the curiosity to be interested to learn.
Exactly. And it's recognizing, set and setting are so important when it comes to these conversations. What is the mindset? Are you coming from a frustrated space, and that's what you're projecting, into the conversation? Is your partner just getting home from work, and they haven't had an opportunity to kind of transition from the professional into the personal space, right? So what is our mindset going into these conversations, right? Are we in a space where we're able to give the information from that non-judgmental or non-critical space? And is my partner able to receive what I'm saying to you, right?
Because the receipt part also, I think ego plays into that a little bit. Sometimes there's ego feelings of, wait a minute, if we're talking about this, does that mean I'm not doing a good job? And it taps into these inadequacy feelings or insecurity feelings. And I believe if there was just one shift of understanding that ego doesn't need to have a place right here. Everybody's on the same page that we want to have a rocking, amazing sexual experience. And what if we could table that for a moment and be curious and interested?
Yes, yes. It's that curiosity. I say all the time, it's that curiosity that draws us in, right? We look at children, we look at the way that, we learn about the world. We get curious, and we come from a space of like, I'm not sure what's happening here, right? And that's what draws us in. It's when we make those assumptions that really pushes us away and creates that distance and that space, right? And especially working with couples that have been together a long time, right? We tend to fall into the assumptions of knowing, I think I know my partner, right? Where if I say this, then this is how they're going to respond. If I do this, then that's what they're going to come back at me with, right? And when we have those assumptions, it keeps us from getting curious. And it's recognizing that the only thing constant in life is change, right?
100%.
So with every conversation that we have, with everything that we're exposed to, I mean, we have so much information at the palm of our hands, literally, right? We're scrolling through social media and all of these ideas are being presented to us. So everything that we're exposed to creates little shifts inside, right? And over time, those little shifts might become big shifts, right? If we're talking about long-term relationships, that maybe there are children and families involved. For women, with every pregnancy, there's a massive transformation of their bodies. So the things that they found arousing prior to pregnancy might be very different after baby. And in the first 1 to 2 years after baby, let's take nipple play into consideration, right? If these moms are breastfeeding, right, then no, nipples are off the table for some time, right? That doesn't mean that they can't be brought back onto the table, right? But we have to be able to check in with our partners and start to wonder about what's going on in their world.
And I really like that example specifically because it's an obvious one. It's an obvious one where we can make a connection and recognize, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And I would hope that would help people understand, okay, so if you can see that one, obviously, is it not possible that there's other ones that aren't so obvious? Exactly. And what would that feel like to your partner to be recognized and seen in that way, to understand, hey, I also don't really like this. It doesn't mean I'm not crazy about you. Just don't like that thing, thing that's happening.
Exactly. And I mean, the relationship that we have with our bodies is such a massive piece here, and because if I don't even like the skin that I'm in, then why would I invite anybody else in to share in that space, And I work with so many young moms, new moms that are navigating this space, and their partners are like, well, what about me? And they're taking it personally, as you're saying, where that ego is getting involved, where they're not able to kind of step outside of themselves in a way to recognize that there's something else going on here outside of the relationship itself, and can we get curious about, well, what is going on for my partner? Or, on the flip side of it, I work with a lot of high power men as well, like entrepreneurs or high up on that corporate ladder, and where this kind of stress of, well, what's going on with the business, and what does that mean for our family, and am I going to be able to provide, and how that anxiety tends to take over. And then the wife is like, well, I all of that doesn't matter to me because, well, what about our relationship? But when we're able to recognize that everything is interconnected and everything kind of feeds into our overall experience here, can we tease it apart so that we're not taking those things personally?
So I'm going to give you the biggest question I get, which is, how many times a week should we be having sex? I get asked that, and I would love to know what your token answer is. What do you say when people serve that up to you?
So, one, I have to stress that there is no normal.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone.
That what is normal and comfortable for me might not be what's normal and comfortable for you. And that's where couples need to be able to open up that conversation as well. Like, what are the expectations? Because when I ask my couples outright, and I have them write it down on a piece of paper and then give it to me, right? So that their responses don't influence each other. Right. But then when I say, oh, this one says 1 to 2 times a week, and this one says 2 to 3 times a week. And they're like, I thought you wanted it every day. And for them to hear that actually it's not what I expected, or it doesn't match that story that I've created, right, can be so powerful. But I do also kind of lean on some of the research from Dr. Barry McCarthy, where, this idea of sexless marriages, that we can define sexless marriages as less than 10 times a year. And so what I say to my couples is that, I can't tell you, the frequency that feels comfortable for you. That's what we're here to explore, right? But I can say, if you aren't having these intimate moments at least once a month, then that's where we need to maybe take a look and see where is the disconnect, and what's getting in the way of creating at least the time and space for meaningful connection to happen.
And I agree with that, Rachel, because I think having that benchmark, to know that from Dr. McCarthy, I'm a huge fan of him as well. And I use that same quote with clients as well. And I think that it does so much because it requires a little bit of reflection. It requires this understanding of, oh, wait a minute, where do I fall in that? And I would rather err on that side than the idea of this is what you should be doing. How about let's look at what we should not be doing?
Right.
and then let's go from there. And then let's have this strength-based approach of what are all the things we could do to level up? What are all the things we could do to create this positive shift in how we want to be having sex?
Exactly.
Which affects the frequency, type, duration, quantity, quality, all these different things,
All of the things. Yeah.
Well, another big idea that I wanted to get your opinion on is self-pleasure. Because if someone can't please themselves, how can they please someone else? That's an idea to think about. How do you expect someone else to also know how to please you if you don't even know what you like?
Exactly.
I think it's all wrapped in together with this idea. We have to be sexually explorative. We've got to be explorative about ourselves and our own bodies, and we have to be explorative about our partner and our partner's body.
Yep.
And I think that bridge with that exploration creates this opportunity for so much connection. And there's some play involved. There's some novelty involved in that. And that keeps things exciting and different if we're always exploring each other. But I think a lot of exploration just comes to a big halt when people get out of the beginning new lust stages.
Yes, exactly. I sometimes ask my couples, whatever happened to dry humping,
Yes, exactly. Or, heavy making out, heavy petting.
Exactly.
I'm not sure I can even say those words, or I'm going to get, crucified by how that's not how people talk these days. But in my time, when I was a lot younger and dating, it was heavy petting. That's what people called it. It doesn't even exist in that way. I feel like it's so we're either kissing and we're touching, or we're having sex, and there's not a lot of in between.
Exactly. And that's where I also come back to Dr. Bear McCartney's work, where I go through the 5 years of touch, and we kind of explore that. And that's a huge part of the initial phases of my work as well, of let's expand on what touch means, right? But then when we're thinking about touch for ourselves, and when you're talking about self-pleasure and the role that it plays, and how couples become disconnected because we're not allowing for that exploration. But I think if we're not open to self-pleasure, it also indicates a disconnect with ourselves, right? And what is getting in the way of that? And a lot of times shame is one of those major pieces around our bodies and the messages that we're told around what's acceptable about our bodies and exploring our bodies in these ways, right? And I have in my office here readily available a little workbook from Betty Dodson. And I have, the drawings of the different vulvas, right? And when I hear women, or when I start opening up the conversation around self-pleasure, and I ask the question, when was the last time that you actually took a look at your vulva outside of toileting or shaving, right? When was the last time that you actually just took a look at her to get to know her? Right.
Well, in an appreciative way, and not in a perfunctory, yes, I have to shave, or yes, I'm going to the bathroom, in a appreciative way, to be able to celebrate, this is amazing that I have this ability to receive and give pleasure,
Exactly. Or in a curious way. Right. And if if that kind of appreciative way is something that's disconnecting for you, like, I don't know, how can I even appreciate this thing that I'm told, is I'm dirty for touching, right?
Right.
Then how can we get curious about this part of our body? And then you get curious around what type of touch actually is more pleasurable or less pleasurable, right? And then I think that can help us to kind of build into that appreciation. And it's so incredible how sometimes when I ask women, I'm like, when I feel that kind of disconnect or that apprehension around connecting to our bodies in this way, I pull out the book and I'm like, oh, can you take a look at, some of these pictures and let me know, which one resonates with you, and they're looking at it with this face of like, oh, I have no idea. Like, looking at all of these, I don't even know, where to start. And if their partner's in the room and I see the partner kind of looking over, their shoulder, and I'll turn to the partner and I'm like, well, can you tell me which one of these vulvas resonates, and they're able to pinpoint, very quickly. Oh, it's that one. Of course it's that one. Right. And I turn back to the women and I'm like, if you aren't even comfortable or knowledgeable around what your body looks like, right, then how can you expect them to also know how to please you, right? And how can you expect yourself to experience the pleasure and connection that you absolutely deserve if you are so disconnected from your body?
I agree more. The idea that we might not even understand what our vulvas look like, that we might not have ever taken a moment to be curious. We might have been driven by these concepts of shame or these concepts of it's not okay, it's not right. And we haven't stopped to think about, where does that even come from? Exactly. Have we done the explorative work to understand why we even feel that way? And how does that affect our relationships? And here we are as adults, and are we letting things hold us back from having this fulfilling, beautiful sexual experiences?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it, because there's so much room. There's so much room for play and exploration. But again, when we're, stuck behind these stories or these messages that we've been told, sometimes it's so tough to navigate. But if you are willing to allow yourself to be vulnerable in this way, it's what's on the other side can just be, beyond your wildest imaginations, I think.
Love that. One of the biggest things that I like to say to anybody that talks to me about sex is just 2 words, which is slow down.
Yes.
If everyone's just slowed down.
Yes.
Tell me how that fits in with how you work with your clients.
Oh, well, that slowing down speaks to the sensuality, right? Again, if we're able to recognize that there are 2 distinct experiences, sensuality is about slowing down enough to really take in and receive and embody and just kind of, marinate, in all of the really yummy, juicy things that are available for us in these moments. Sensuality means connecting to your senses, right? And what a beautiful way to learn how to be present, right? Because if we are not here in this moment, yes, our bodies might be physically here, right? But if I'm thinking about, is the door locked and who's going to pick up the kids from school and what am I going to make for dinner? And I forgot about this email and I got to make this phone call. Then are we really present and available for the pleasure and connection that's in this space? And so to slow down enough to connect with the different sensations of what's going on. And this also is kind of related to the experience of simmering, right? That we talk about in sex therapy, of can we allow this moment to just kind of settle in a way so that we can get excited about it and maybe act on it later if we want to, right? And so this idea of connecting to our senses, and I love one of the tools that I just love so much. And even though it's specifically related to, working with anxiety, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, connecting to our senses, right? I very much pull that into my work. And I ask my clients to once a day, whether you're, walking from your car into your house or, your work building, or if you are going on a walk, or even if you're sitting in your living room, right? What are 5 things that you can really see right now? And 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, 2 things that you can smell, 1 thing that you can taste, right? For me, the order of the senses don't matter as much as actually taking the time to tune into them, right? Mm-hmm. And if they're able to practice that muscle throughout the day, then imagine bringing that into these intimate experiences, right? What parts of your partner's body do you really love to see and to touch and feel? And what do they smell like? And what are you hearing in terms of their breathing? Is it speeding up? Is it slowing down? And what does that mean, right? And being able to tune in. Do you have a candle going to kind of help, with that ambiance, maybe putting on a playlist of really relaxing, beautiful music. I like to tell my clients to refrain from music with words, because especially if you know the song, you're going to start singing the song and getting into the song versus getting back into the moment, So there's so
questions, like where you're saying, what do you smell like? What do you feel like? All those. I wonder what each partner would feel if we actually told them that. If we actually knew, oh, my partner loves that I smell this way. They love that I feel this way. They love it. It's kind of like this idea of, do we ever tell our partner those deeper parts? I call it the level. We're going down. We're going a little bit deeper. Do we go deeper? Or is it always just, oh, baby, right there to the right, to the left? We miss that deeper part that talks about touch and smell and feeling, and again, slowing down to do all of that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where my sandwich approach comes in, right? Because we can really express, when you were wearing that perfume yesterday, I just was it just did something for me, right? So that we can start to go those layers deeper. And that's what really, when we have that understanding and we're able to gain, those insights, and then we're more intentional about creating or recreating or bringing in those pieces, then that's where we're having those more satisfying and fulfilling experiences, which then helps us to access our desire in a different way.
And then now we're getting somewhere.
Exactly. So, it can kind of seem like a process, right? And it's like this idea of, I have to do the work, right? But
what a fun process.
Exactly.
I mean, we talk about missing out on some low-hanging fruit of fun here. That's the good stuff.
Exactly.
I think that if more people would give pause and really think about, you know what, I should just try this, because what do I have to lose?
Right.
I have so much to gain. We might suddenly completely transform our sex life.
Absolutely. And then what does that say for our relationship overall?
Because relational satisfaction ultimately goes up monumentally if we feel like we're having connected, good sex. Not good enough, but really connected. And it really changes how we view overall our relationship, our life in general. It's kind of like the old adage, we'd hear, oh, you just need to get laid. You just need to have sex. I mean, there's something to the concept of, we feel better when we do, but imagine how much better it would be if even the kind we're getting is completely different.
Exactly. It was more meaningful, right? I mean, I've had clients as I go through their sexual history where they were in relationships where they were having sex more often. But if that emotional intimacy wasn't there, then it creates a different experience altogether, right? And going back to the why is this important? And again, we're back to Dr. Barry McCarthy, those statistics of when couples are having sex regularly, but regularly is defined by the couple, right? That adds to, 60 to 75% of increase in marital satisfaction. Right. But then if couples aren't having sex, and that is defined as less than 10 times a year, right, then that adds to, it's a significant drain to the relationship, right? And I think it's the opposite. I think when couples are having sex, it's like a 15 to 20% increase in marital satisfaction. And if they aren't, then it's a 60 to 75% decrease in marital satisfaction, right? So it's recognizing, how this adds that sense of vitality and richness to the relationship. It bumps you from that B to an A, right? That kind of like, oh, that connection just feels just so much more meaningful than just the sex itself.
I think that I definitely am going to have you back for a part two, because I didn't even get to some of the things I wanted to get to today. So we're going to have to make that happen. But I do want to say, if anybody, is trying to find you, I think it's on Instagram and Facebook, Infinite Intimacy Therapy, for sure. And I know you have some retreats coming up, right? Tell us about that.
So I don't have any group retreats scheduled now, but I have added a new service to my repertoire where I'm offering private retreats for couples. So I have 1, 2, and 3-day programs that are geared to really speak to a different part of your intimate relationship. So day 1 is really focusing on that foundation. Do you know the difference between desire and arousal? Do you know your desire style? Do you know your arousal style? And how does that fit within the context of the relationship, and how can we speak to that a little bit more? So if they choose the one day, then that's really what we're gonna hone into. Mm-hmm. The intention behind these private retreats, and because I've been doing this work for some time, and I have hosted group retreats and group workshops and for couples and women, what I've done is I've kind of distilled it into these 3 powerful days where it's like 3 months of therapy into 3 days. It's really kind of my idea behind it, that instead of meeting the hour by hour, we are going to sit down for a full day, up to 3 days, and we're really just going to knock all of this out, right? So working on that foundational piece, day 1. Day 2 is the expansion, right? So now that we have that understanding, what other fun and exciting pieces can we add to this so that you are feeling that vibrancy and that novelty, right? Because we recognize it's the novelty that really helps to keep that spark alive, right? And so allowing for that variability, that flexibility, and the different pieces that can fit in there. And then day 3, because I also kind of tap into kind of the holistic work, and I've done some tantric trainings and erotic breath work and those types of things. And so that's where day 3 is really adding to that depth of like that more of that energetic connection. Some people might call it that spiritual connection, but it's really about that energy between the both of you and going through those more so of what people would consider tantric practices. And so that's I'm so excited because I've already worked with quite a few couples this year. I just rolled it out in January of this year, and we are having so much fun. And there's so much incredible connection that's taking place. And it's just a really wonderful space to be.
I can only imagine the strengthening of the bond that happens in that, separate from even how much better this sex is going to be, but just the bond and that intimacy that's created. Yeah, I bet that's really amazing. So I'm excited about that for you, and can't wait to keep hearing about all the things that you're doing. I do want to end with asking you a question that we always have a question that a prior guest has left. And so I want to pose that to you, and then I want you to give us one for a future guest. Your question is, if you could pursue anything, regardless of money, what would you be doing?
Pursue anything regardless of money. A part of me wants to say I would still be doing this work because, especially working with women and that empowerment piece of really being able to connect with this part of ourselves and find our voice in that way, and how it transcends, this work for me is just, it's more than the professional. It really hits in a personal space. But I think I would be maybe traveling the world more and having these conversations where I would want to open up these conversations in a lot of different spaces. And maybe even, especially if money wasn't an object, really kind of work with women around sexual trauma and how prevalent human trafficking is, and working in that space. And I think that's maybe expanding these conversations to women that have really had some really negative experiences, I think is probably the direction.
Fantastic. Okay, so what question do you want to leave behind for the person? What you got for them?
Okay, well, I'm feeling like I need to stick to the space of pleasure, right? And so
I love that. Let's stick to it. My favorite topic.
Maybe thinking about, how often are you allowing for pleasure into your life, and what is it that brings you the most pleasure?
Oh, I can't wait to have the next answer that, especially because it's usually a guest that does not align with that topic, which makes it fun. So I can't wait to serve that one up. Well, this has been a great pleasure. And thank you so much for joining us today. And everybody, Rachel Smith, you'll be able to find her in our show notes and more information. So we will talk soon. We're going to have that part 2. I just know we're going to do it.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. All right.